A vagabond was looking for a meal one day in a picturesque old English village. Hungry almost to the point of fainting, he stopped at a pub bearing the classic name Inn of St. George and the Dragon. "Please, ma'am, could you spare a bite to eat?" he asked the lady who answered the knock at the kitchen door. "A bite to eat," she growled, "for a sorry, no good bum, a foul-smelling beggar? No," she snapped as she almost slammed the door on his hand. Halfway down the lane, the tramp stopped, turned, and eyed the words on the sign again, St. George and the Dragon. Then he slowly walked back and knocked again on the kitchen door. "Now what do you want?" the woman asked angrily. "Well, ma'am, if St. George is here, could I please talk to him this time?" We laugh because it's a humorous story on the surface, and of course it's meant to be. But if we stop to think about it, it isn't really funny that this poor man was treated so shabbily and denied the food that he desperately needed. And maybe that sympathetic response makes us want to side with Judas in today's gospel story. Why wasn't the expensive perfume sold and the money used to feed the poor? Of course, the author of John quickly provides an insight into a possible answer to that question. Judas was thought to be a thief, and he probably wanted the money in the purse for his benefit. But why does Jesus seemingly take a different approach towards the poor to whom he has always ministered? Why does he seem to welcome this extravagance towards himself? We need to examine the story more closely to be able to answer those questions. The Reverend Barbara Brown Taylor, a renowned preacher and a retired Episcopal priest, observes that Mary does 4 remarkable things in the story. First, she lets her hair down in a room full of men. An honorable woman would never have done that in the first century. Then she pours perfume on Jesus' feet, not his head, which would have been the normal way to honor someone. Third, she touches him, and a single woman touching a single man, even in the company of family and friends, would have violated custom and tradition. And then, in perhaps the most bizarre act of all, she wipes his feet with her hair. With her hair. What could have prompted such inexplicable, uncustomary behavior? Reverend Taylor concludes that Mary was prophetic, which resonates with Jesus' reply to Judas. And we know from several Bible stories that prophets do seemingly weird things. She also points out that the only time the feet of a man would receive anywhere near such treatment would be in death, preparation for burial. In fact, the nard she used may have been left over from the burial of Lazarus, whom Jesus raised from the dead not long before his current visit. So thus, she was most likely acting out Jesus' coming death. And by the way, acting out is another thing we generally associate with prophets. Now, the sale of the nard may have provided enough money to feed a poor family for a year. And that's not insignificant. But what about Jesus' death and resurrection? It's helped millions of us in our lives, and it has the power to keep on doing so. God's love for us and what God provides us every day is incomprehensible and immeasurable. Mary's supposed extravagance pales in comparison to God's extravagance. And we cannot even begin to measure what God has done using our knowledge of economics or mathematics. Also, Charles Swindoll observes, a gift is a demonstration of love from one heart to another. You cherish those special, personal gifts. Maybe Mary was simply acting out of love, and Jesus was enjoying, cherishing a gift from someone he loved and who loved him. Maybe he understood her prophetic act of preparing him for his death to come, and the help in delivering his message about his death to those disciples who still didn't quite get it. Maybe he saw in her the fulfillment of the commandment he had yet to give, to love one another as I have loved you. We may not know for certain what he was thinking, but we can know what God has done for us, not only in sending Jesus to be incarnate, but in our individual lives as well. Looking back over my life, I can see what was not always evident to me. Even when I had turned my back on God, and I did, even when I mocked God at times, and sadly I did, God was there waiting patiently for me, loving me, giving me chance after chance until I could finally understand, at least as much as I can, what is truly important. For example, I suppose I could have given the money that I spent on this stole to help feed the poor. We could sell many of the items in this church and give the money to the poor. We could close the church, sell the building and the land, give a lot of money to feed the poor. But money is rarely a solution to the problems of the poor. And without the church, I could never have found my way back to God. Without the church, we wouldn't have a place to worship or offer and present ourselves, our souls and bodies to be a reasonable, holy, and living sacrifice to God, as it will do shortly in the celebration of the Eucharist. And I pray these are not just words we say. Without the church, we would lack motivation and have difficulty presenting our gifts to God. And without the church, the poor would be even more neglected and receive less care than they do now. Some things cannot be measured in dollars, and rarely, if ever, are there absolute answers, especially from dualistic thinking. As H.L. Mencken said, for every complex problem, there is a simple solution, which is probably wrong. We must avoid this or that only solutions. Life is usually much more complicated, and we need to consider a variety of things. Fortunately, God, through grace, has given us the freedom of choice. Also, God, because of love for us, wants us all to flourish. Now, God certainly doesn't want us to ignore the poor, any of the marginalized, especially those who have difficulty flourishing, to slam the door in their face, as in the opening story, so to speak. We do need to be good stewards of what we have received, but sometimes it may be okay to let our hair down, maybe break with tradition or rational economic thought, either to enjoy life or to show our love for God. As long as we're trying to consider the alternatives and the consequences of our actions, as long as we are considering not just ourselves, but the greater good, as long as our decisions are informed and based upon love, compassion, peace, joy, and God's justice, then I think we can feel good about them. In the name of the one God, the creator of the Word and the Spirit. Amen.